In the vast forgotten corridors of human history, one peculiar chapter stands apart, a tale so strange it challenges everything we thought we knew about our species. Imagine an island untouched by time, where elephants were the size of ponies, rats grew bigger than cats, dragons roamed with venom-laced teeth, and colossal storks stood eye to eye with humans. But perhaps most astounding of all, this island was once home to a mysterious people, standing barely 3 feet tall, with chimp-sized brains, yet wielding fire, crafting tools, and hunting dwarf elephants. These were Homo Floresiensis, nicknamed the hobbits of human evolution, not fantasy, but fact. First discovered in 2003 inside a cave on the Indonesian island of Flores, their bones unlocked a story unlike any other in paleoanthropology. Were they diseased humans, or a separate species entirely? How did such small-brained beings achieve such sophisticated behavior? And why did they vanish shortly after our species arrived? Their world was bizarre. Their lives were harsh, but their existence forces us to rethink what it truly means to be human. This is the story of Homo Floresiensis, the ancient human competitor you've never heard of, and the lost species that walked among dragons. In 2003, hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash and sediment in Liang Bua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists uncovered the partial skeleton of a tiny adult woman, unlike anything they'd ever seen. She stood barely over 3 feet tall, had disproportionately long arms, large feet, and a skull the size of a grapefruit, housing a brain no larger than that of a chimpanzee. And yet, she wasn't a child, nor a modern human suffering from disease. She was something else entirely. Nicknamed Flo and labeled specimen LB1, her discovery sparked global controversy. At first, many believed this was simply a Homo sapiens with a disorder like microcephaly. But as more skeletons emerged from the cave, all similarly small, all anatomically consistent, the truth became impossible to ignore. These were not pathological individuals. They were members of an entirely separate human species, one previously unknown to science, Homo Floresiensis. What made this even more incredible was their age. These hobbits lived until about 50,000 years ago, coexisting in time with Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, on an island ecosystem shaped by isolation, where dwarf elephants roamed, rats the size of cats thrived, and Komodo dragons were apex predators. Evolution had taken a dramatic turn. Cut off from the mainland by deep ocean trenches for over 1 million years, Flores became a crucible of evolutionary experimentation, and it was here that the ancestors of Homo Floresiensis, possibly Homo erectus or even an earlier lineage, arrived, adapted, and slowly shrank through a process known as insular dwarfism. Over tens or hundreds of thousands of years, their bodies and brains miniaturized in response to scarce resources, yet their intelligence seemingly remained intact. Despite their tiny brain size, roughly 1/3 that of a modern human, they crafted thousands of stone tools, controlled fire, hunted prey larger than themselves, and likely lived in organized social groups. Their tools were complex, some even hafted, and found alongside bones of stegodon, dwarf elephants, marked with butchery scars, suggesting planned hunting rather than scavenging. The discovery shattered long-held assumptions in anthropology, particularly the idea that larger brains automatically meant higher intelligence. Instead, Homo Floresiensis demonstrated that brain organization, not just size, was key to cognitive ability. Yet just as their story was being uncovered, it was already over. Around 50,000 years ago, the same time modern humans first reached the region, the hobbits vanished, along with the giant storks, pygmy stegodons, and other unique fauna of Flores. Their extinction eerily mirrored that of the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. Arriving Homo sapiens, armed with more efficient tools, higher population numbers, and possibly even hostility, likely displaced or outcompeted them. Whether the encounter was peaceful or violent, brief or prolonged, the result was the same. Homo Floresiensis disappeared into the archaeological silence, and yet they left behind something invaluable: a challenge to our view of what it means to be human. The existence of these small, clever people on an isolated island proves that human evolution was never linear, never inevitable, but filled with branches, dead ends, and fascinating alternatives. We were not alone in our ascent. For hundreds of millennia, other kinds of humans walked the earth. And on Flores, one such group thrived, hunted, and lived among dragons, only to vanish just as we arrived. Their bones may be quiet, but their story roars through time as a haunting echo of how rich and strange our shared past truly is. The skeletal remains of Homo floresiensis are a fascinating mosaic of traits, some primitive, some surprisingly advanced, and together they paint the picture of a species caught in evolutionary limbo, straddling a line between ancient hominins and modern humans. The most striking feature, of course, is their size. Adults like LB1 and LB8 stood only about 1.06 to 1.09 meters tall, barely 3 foot 6 inches, and weighed between 25 to 30 kilograms, making them smaller than even the shortest modern human populations, like the African pygmies or the Andamanese. But the mystery deepens when you look past the surface. Their skulls, though small in volume, only 380 cubic centimeters, comparable to chimpanzees and australopithecines, show a surprisingly human-like configuration in some regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex associated with planning and higher thinking. The absence of a chin, reduced humeral torsion, a shoulder feature, robust limb bones, and their long, flat feet point toward a mix of primitive characteristics, some dating back to Australopithecus, a species over 2 million years older. Their wrists, more similar to those of apes or Australopithecus afarensis, lacked the modifications seen in modern humans and even Homo erectus, suggesting that Homo floresiensis may have branched off the human lineage earlier than expected. Their short clavicles and unusual shoulder positioning place their arms in a more forward, shrugged posture, hinting at a different range of motion, perhaps even aiding in climbing or close-quarter hunting. Their gait, inferred from long feet and bent knees, would have been high-stepping and inefficient compared to ours, but clearly functional in Flores' rugged terrain. Despite such primitive locomotion, their tool use was anything but basic. Over 10,000 stone tools found at Liang Bua, including blades, flakes, and microblades, many hafted for hunting, suggest a level of technological complexity that doesn't match their brain size. In modern human terms, their cranial capacity would imply significant cognitive limitations, yet their behaviors defy this expectation. This discrepancy shook the anthropological community to its core. If Homo floresiensis could make fire, butcher prey, and craft sophisticated tools with a brain half the size of Homo erectus, then perhaps we've misunderstood the link between brain size and intelligence entirely. Multiple evolutionary paths may have produced intelligent beings with very different neurological architectures. For years, some scientists resisted the idea that these remains represented a separate species, arguing instead that LB1 was a diseased modern human, suffering from microcephaly, Laron syndrome, cretinism, or Down syndrome. These claims were investigated thoroughly and ultimately disproven. The skeletal features were consistent across multiple individuals, not just LB1. Morphometric studies comparing the skull of Homo floresiensis with microcephalic humans and small-bodied populations found significant differences. The skull was more similar to Homo erectus, and in some features, even more archaic. In 2015, a study of 40 teeth from multiple individuals confirmed their uniqueness. The premolars resembled those of early humans, but the molars had more advanced traits, a strange evolutionary mix not seen in Homo sapiens. Some researchers even argued that Homo floresiensis was too primitive to belong in the Homo genus at all. Evolutionary trees based on anatomical comparison placed them near Homo habilis or Australopithecus sediba, or suggested they branched off from a common ancestor with Homo habilis more than 2 million years ago. Others proposed a more recent ancestor, Homo erectus, which is known to have reached nearby islands like Java. But even this theory had complications. In 2016, the discovery of even older remains on Flores, teeth and a jaw dated to around 700,000 years ago, confirmed that Homo Floresiensis or their ancestors had been on the island for a very long time. These earlier fossils were even smaller than LB1, suggesting that the dwarfing process happened rapidly and early, likely within a few thousand years of island isolation. To test this, scientists ran evolutionary simulations with multiple variables and found that in the right conditions, a full-sized Homo erectus population could evolve into the small-bodied Homo Floresiensis within just 300 to 400 generations, possibly as quickly as 10,000 years. While the exact ancestor remains uncertain due to the lack of preserved DNA, likely destroyed by the island's warm, wet climate, the physical evidence suggests a rapid and extreme case of insular dwarfism. And still, the species' strangeness defies neat categorization. They were smaller than Australopithecus, yet lived hundreds of thousands of years later. Their brains were tiny, but their minds were sharp. Their bodies were archaic, yet their tools were advanced. In the end, Homo Floresiensis challenges not just our evolutionary timelines, but our very definition of what it means to be human. Were they the result of early African hominins venturing out of the continent before Homo erectus? Or were they island dwarfs descended from Erectus himself, shaped by millennia of isolation? We may never know for sure. But what we do know is this: they were not failed experiments or deformed outliers. They were survivors, a successful, enduring human species who carved out an existence in one of the strangest evolutionary theaters on Earth. Imagine stepping onto a remote island over 100,000 years ago, a place sealed off from the rest of the world by deep ocean trenches, volcanic ridges, and isolation so complete that nature rewrote its own rulebook. This was Flores, not just an island, but an evolutionary experiment lost in time. Here, gigantic beasts had shrunk into manageable sizes, and humble creatures had evolved into monsters. It was a place where dwarf elephants the size of horses shared the land with giant rats, monstrous Komodo dragons, and towering predatory storks that could look an average man in the eye, or in the case of Homo Floresiensis, tower over them. The island's most mysterious inhabitants, the so-called hobbits of human history, stood barely 3.5 feet tall, with brains smaller than a chimp's, and yet they weren't helpless prey in this lost world. In fact, they thrived here for tens of thousands of years. The very isolation that turned elephants into miniatures and storks into giants also reshaped an ancient population of hominins, possibly descended from Homo erectus, into something entirely new. A separate human species forged by scarcity, danger, and time. Flores was not a gentle place. Its active volcanoes, rugged terrain, and limited resources meant that only the most adaptable species could survive. And in this crucible of evolution, Homo Floresiensis didn't just scrape by. They left behind thousands of stone tools, evidence of fire use, and butchered bones of stegodon elephants, showing that they hunted with purpose and precision. Their prey, Stegodon florensis insularis, stood around 6 feet at the shoulder and weighed over 1,000 pounds. Yet these tiny humans were able to bring them down, likely using coordinated group tactics and stone blades sharpened from volcanic rock. At the same time that Neanderthals were hunting mammoths in frozen Europe, these hobbits were taking down dwarf elephants in tropical Southeast Asia. But they weren't the only predators on Flores. The now extinct Leptoptelos robustus, a giant stork species nearly 6 feet tall, likely preyed on smaller vertebrates, including potentially the juveniles of Homo floresiensis. Unlike their modern stork cousins, which are mostly scavengers, L. robustus had thick, heavy bones and an aggressive morphology that suggests it hunted on foot and could easily overpower smaller prey. Just imagine a bird, twice your height, stalking your children in the underbrush. This was daily life for the hobbits. And if that wasn't enough, they also shared the island with prehistoric Komodo dragons, not the 90-kilogram lizards of today, but ancient titans that may have reached over 220 kilograms in weight. Apex predators with venomous bites, razor-sharp teeth, and the speed to ambush any creature, even humans. These dragons likely preyed on the dwarf stegodon as well, competing directly with Homo floresiensis for meat. The island's ecosystem was a delicate balance of survival, danger, and resource scarcity, a jungle chessboard where every move could mean life or death. Yet the hobbits endured. They used caves like Liang Bua not just for shelter, but as centers of activity, crafting tools, preparing food, and raising families. Tens of thousands of stone tools, including blades, perforators, and flakes, have been found alongside charred bones and ash layers, suggesting the controlled use of fire. Some tools were designed to be hafted, indicating technological planning and foresight. This presents a paradox. How could a species with a brain volume of just 380 cubic centimeters, comparable to a chimpanzee, display such intelligence and survival skill? The answer may lie not in the size of their brains, but in how those brains were organized. Neuroanatomical studies suggest that key areas associated with higher thinking, like Brodmann Area 10 in the prefrontal cortex, were surprisingly developed. This means that Homo Floresiensis may have been small-brained, but not simple-minded. Their cognitive capabilities were likely adapted to their environment in ways we still struggle to understand. However, this golden era didn't last forever. Around 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, our species, began arriving in Southeast Asia. Within a few thousand years of our arrival, Homo Floresiensis vanished from the archaeological record. So did the dwarf elephants, the giant storks, and much of the island's unique megafauna. Coincidence? Probably not. The timing mirrors what happened with the Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, and dozens of extinct animal species worldwide. Wherever Homo sapiens arrived, local populations disappeared shortly afterward. Whether due to direct conflict, competition for resources, ecological disruption, or the introduction of diseases, we have a consistent track record of replacing what came before us. Liang Bua Cave, once lit by hobbit firelight, now lies quiet, its ancient layers sealed in sediment and mystery. Yet even in their absence, the hobbits of Flores remain one of the most haunting chapters in our evolutionary history. A reminder that we were not the only intelligent bipeds on Earth, and that we once shared this world with creatures far more incredible and far more human than we ever imagined. They were not myths, not malformed outcasts, and not evolutionary dead ends. They were a successful, adaptive species that held their own in a brutal ecosystem until we came. And in their bones, in their tools, in the silence of their vanished world, we find echoes not only of what was lost, but of who we are. The story of Homo Floresiensis is a powerful reminder that humanity's past was far more diverse and complex than we often imagine. These tiny hobbits were not just oddities, but fully human beings who adapted, thrived, and survived on a mysterious island filled with giant predators and strange creatures for tens of thousands of years. Their existence challenges our ideas about what it means to be human, proving it's not about size or brain volume, but resilience, ingenuity, and survival. Yet, their disappearance around the time Homo sapiens arrived shows a familiar and somber pattern of extinction driven by competition, highlighting the fragility of other human species in the face of our expansion. Remembering Homo Floresiensis is more than honoring a lost species. It's acknowledging a chapter of our shared story that reveals how unique and varied human evolution truly was. So if this journey into our ancient relatives fascinates you, don't just watch and forget. Like, subscribe, share, and join the conversation in the Community tab to help decide which ancient human story we explore next. Because these lost humans deserve to be known, their legacy preserved, and their lessons remembered as we continue to uncover the incredible saga of what it truly means to be human.